last time we began the proof of Gauss-Bonnet theorem. So let us continue that now. So we introduced the notion of a curvilinear graph on a surface. It is nothing but the image of the geometric realization of a graph under a map alpha, which is injective on the oval of mod G and smooth restricted to each edge, smooth and regular. So such a thing is called as curvilinear graph on the surface. So a curvilinear graph will be called cellular graph if you throw away the image of this G, the gamma G, this curly G from S, the set of components, each of them of the surface, each of them is covered by a surface patch, so that each of them will be actually homeomorphic to some open disk inside R3, inside R2. Okay. So that is the whole idea. So the latter part will be coming to us automatically the way we start constructing this curly G. So only thing is we have to struggle hard to make it image of a graph. Okay, so the hard part is there. Nevertheless, this thing will not be all that difficult. So anyway, I am going to give a complete proof of this one. Okay, when each of the component has its boundary just consisting of 3 edges, such a thing will be called a triangulation of surface. So we are trying to prove now the existence of triangulation. Okay, so last time you have seen this one, but I'm just repeating so that what we have to do, just to relate for the continuity sake, I'm repeating. It follows that interior of each curvilinear cellular polygon is homeomorphic to an open disk. The boundary of each curvilinear polygon is homeomorphic to S1 and is made up of finitely many smooth arcs, which are the edges of G. Each edge of G occurs as a part of the boundary of precisely 2 faces. All the topological results and concepts which hold for a cellular graph also hold for a triangulation and vice versa, except a few combinatorial results and concepts. Excuse me. Given a cellular graph G on S, we can easily subdivide, okay, each of the cells into a triangulation as follows. First, note that once we have got already a cellular graph, the boundary of any curvilinear polygon in G has at least 3 sides and 3 vertices. If this is not the case, you make it by adding extra vertices, that's all. In any curvilinear polygon has more than 3 vertices, that means like a quadrangle or a pentagon and so on. All that you have to do is you take another extra point in the interior and cut the entire curvilinear polygon into triangles by joining the central point to the points on the vertices on the boundary polygon. So that way we can get a triangulation. So getting a triangulation is easier part. So getting a graph which will be cellular is the harder part. Actually, cellularity also comes very easily the way we start with. Okay. So here is what we want to do. To begin with, this was a curvilinear polygon. So I added an extra point and made it into a triangle. So this part is very easy. If there are only one or two vertices, sometimes or just a single curve is there, first you put extra vertices, at least 3 of them, so that the circle, the boundary circle is divided into a triangle or a quadrangle or a pentagon and so on. After that, you just take one extra point in the interior and put all these extra vertices, extra edges here. So that will make it into a triangulation. Okay. So finally, I state this result. Every compact surface is triangulable. In fact, even if you delete the compactness, it is still true, but that is very hard to prove. Moreover, in this statement, I have not assumed that the surface is a smooth surface. Okay. Nor I am assuming it is R3 and so on. However, we are going to prove this theorem only for a smooth surface. For a general surface, it is a famous theorem, classical result due to Rado. The proof is not at all simple. Here we are going to present a simple proof that works only for smooth compact surfaces. Okay. So first of all, as we have remarked, what you have to get is a cellular graph on S. After that, you can just subdivide it into triangulation. So that part is easy. Okay. So we are trying to get a cellular graph embedded inside S, a curvilinear polygon. So let us have a notation. This D2 denotes the closed unit disk inside R2. Okay. B denotes half the disk. The disk of radius half. Okay. Denote the disk of radius half. And the center is the same thing. Since S is compact, there exists a finite collection of surface patches sigma I defined all over D2 into S, such that if you take only the image of half the disk, sigma I of half the disk, the finitely many of them will cover it. The whole of S is I into 1 to Si. This is because when we start with at each point, by definition, surface is there's a surface patch. So surface patches cover the entire surface. At each point, you have such a thing, but that is obviously an infinite collection. From that, because of compactness, you can extract a finite cover. That's all. This follows easily by definition of surface and compactness. All right. So start with this picture. K could be anything, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. It cannot be 1, because if it's only 1, then this will not be a compact surface. All right. So we can further assume that the covering this S1, S2, Sn, that is minimal in the sense that none of the Si is contained in the union of other Sj's. If that is the case, there is no need for putting Si. You can just delete the Si, because this Sj's is necessary to cover it, right? So this way, once you get a finite covering, you can make it minimal by deleting those which are not necessary. Okay. Immediately it follows that if you take one surface patch and the union of all other surface patches, the intersection must be non-empty. If that is not the case, then what happens is this one will be separate and that will be non-compact thing. The rest of them will be separate. And first of all, they will be disjoint. So right in the beginning, you can assume that the surface is connected, because we prove the theorem for connected compact surfaces, then it will get proved for each component. So together, at triangulation, will be triangulation of the union. So I am assuming that the surface is connected, then it follows that SI intersection union of all the other SJs is non-empty. This will happen for each I. Okay. Now let us have notation CI be the smooth curve, which is the image of boundary of B, which is half the disk. Remember that. The boundary of B, that means the circle of radius half and center 0. Take sigma I of that, call that as CI. So obviously, they will be smooth and regular curves. And consider this G as union of the CIs. So the secret is out. So this G is our candidate for the final triangulation. Okay. Right now, it does not look like a triangulation. It just looks like union of finitely many simple closed curves. Simple closed regular curves on the surface. That's all they are. The problem is they may intersect very badly. They may have overlaps and they may intersect too many times. All sort of things can happen. Okay. They may intersect tangentially and so on. Okay. So idea is to show that by an appropriate choice, G can be made into a cellular graph. Okay. Note that even though we have used the notation G, it does not mean that G is curvilinear graph yet. We have to make it. The only thing that we know is that the union of finitely many simple closed curves on S makes this G. Okay. Now, let me take a very special case which you cannot avoid. Namely, it may happen that one of the curves CI is contained in one of the patches SJ. I and J obviously are different. Okay, CI is the boundary of SI, so it won't be contained inside SI, but it may be contained in SJ. And when I say contained in SJ, I'm assuming CI intersection CJ is empty because CJ is the boundary of SJ. Okay, so assume this. This is the same thing as saying CI is contained interior of SJ. Okay. In that case, what happens is the entire cover consists of only SI and SJ, nothing else. S will be union of SI and SJ. So this is what we want to say first, because this is an interesting case. So let us understand this case very clearly. Once you have a surface is union of just two patches, a compact surface with the union of just two surface patches, then it must be homeomorphic to S2. Okay. But that it is homeomorphic to S2 is not relevant here. I am just telling you that. You can imagine this, it's very easy. Rigorous proof needs some more topology, which is not needed here. Okay. So this is the picture. You have your SJ here. This is the surface patch. CJ is its boundary. SI is contained inside CJ. Okay. Where is the SI? The CI is contained inside. CI is contained inside SJ. Where is SI? Is it this part or is it overlapping like this? So where is this SI? Where is this SI? That is a question. Okay. I want to claim that it is not here. It is not this portion. Why? Because if that is the case, then this whole SI is contained inside SJ. Then it won't be a minimal union, right? We have assumed that it's minimal. One is not contained in the other. Therefore, it follows that this SJ is some portion is here all the time, and this annular portion is covered by this one, and this is the boundary of SI. Okay. So what you don't see is this outside question mark. That is the portion that covers this one. After that, it is overlapping all this annular portion also, and that's coming here. Okay. So it is like interlocking. You have two discs like this, and they have been interlocking like this. So that should be the picture, because one cannot be contained in that. All right, by our assumption. So SI union Sj is the whole picture is what I have to show you. All right. Suppose you just look at SI union Sj, both of them are open subsets of S. Therefore, SI union Sj will be open subsets. But if you include the boundary, they are closed subsets also. Okay, I am taking the boundary also, Si, Sj, image of the proper disk. Okay, so Si union Sj is the union of two closed sets. It's a closed subset of S. By minimality, it follows that Si is not in Sj, nor Sj is in Si. So this is what we observe. Therefore, Ci is in the interior of Sj. It follows that Cj must be in the interior of Si. They don't intersect, Ci and Cj. Therefore, Si union Sj is the union of interior of Si, interior of Sj. Because the boundary part of this one is here, the boundary part of Si is here. So I don't need the boundary part, which means I have written the entire union as union of two open sets. Therefore, it is open also. If something is open as well as closed and non-empty, of course, then it must be the whole space because S is connected. So we have proved that the entire surface is covered by only two surface patches. Okay. So what happens if you look at G? G is just Ci union Cj now. So if you throw away Ci and Cj, the entire thing, the S will be divided into three portions: A1, A2, A3. Okay, this is an easy consequence of Jordan curve theorem, because each Si is a copy of some under some homeomorphism, the copy of D2. Okay. So A1, A2, and A3. There are three portions. Union of all these along with Si, Ci, and Cj, that will make the whole of the surface. A3 is the annular part, interior of Si, intersection interior of Sj. A1 is Si minus Sj, and A2 is Sj minus Si. So in this picture, this portion would be A1, this portion would be A2, this portion, in between portion, is going to be A3 in my notation. Okay. So clearly, A1 and A2 are homeomorphic to a disk, whereas A3 is an annulus. I am calling it annulus. It is homeomorphic to an annulus. Okay, it's annular region. So we can take an arc C running from a point of Ci to a point of Cj inside the annulus A3. Okay, so that will cut the annulus into a disk. Okay, so it's like a cylinder. If you cut it across, then it will become a rectangle. Okay, therefore, the new graph G prime, which is this C union Ci union Cj, this will be cellular on the surface. By adding extra vertices and extra edges, you can make it into a cellular graph and cellular triangle also later. Triangulation. So this is a picture here. A1 is this portion, A2 is this portion, A3 is the cylinder here, okay, or annulus here. You cut it by introducing one extra edge here. So these dotted figures, this portion, this portion, this portion is my curly G. Okay, take a point here, take at least 3 points on this one, and 3 points here. Okay, and then you can take 1 point here, 1 point here, and so on. Cut the whole thing. It will become a cellular graph. Okay, cellular triangulation also. Right? So the simplest case, okay, when one of the CI is contained in one of the SJs is taken care of. Okay. Now let us come to the general case. What is general case? None of the CI is contained in the interior of any of the SJs. Okay. So assume this one. Okay. Now what we want to do is, well, this is the most general case. You can't make pictures here. What we want to make is move G slightly. That means components of G are moved with respect to other components slightly so that there are no overlaps within G. I'm talking about the curves going, there are curves. This is a different curve, that's a different curve, but they may have overlaps. That should not be there. Neither they are tangential. So the only thing that is allowed, of course, they will intersect. They will have to intersect transversely like this. Okay, what is the meaning of transversely? They are not tangential. Okay, the two tangents, take any point of intersection, draw the two tangents, they must be independent. The tangents to the curves must be independent. So that is what we want to achieve. As soon as that is achieved, it will follow that the number of intersections is finite. Okay, so this is the elementary topology using inverse function theorem. Okay, so let me do that one. So let me make these definitions clear. Two embedded arcs, C1 and C2, on a surface are said to be transversal. This is the definition from differential topology. Transversal to each other. So this is a symmetric relation. At each point of the intersection, what should happen? The tangent to C1 and tangent to C2 must be independent. So C1 is not tangential to C2. Two curves are said to be tangential to each other. This you must be knowing. So I'm using that notation, that terminology. Tangential means that the two tangents to the two different curves, they are overlapping. Okay, they may be parallel, they may be in the opposite direction of that. It's also allowed here. Okay, that is the meaning of tangential. They are not independent, then they are tangential. They are independent, then that is transversal. Is that clear? Okay. Now here is another definition, which again I assume that you know it, but I am recalling. Take any continuous function, actually a C1 function, defined on an interval, open interval, let us say, into R, real valued or continuous smooth function. A point R inside R is called a critical value of F. If there exists T belonging to J, such that Ft is equal to R, and the derivative of Ft is 0. Derivative of F at the point T is 0. Okay, such points T are called critical points. The images I am looking at, they are called critical values. Okay, R is a critical value. R is F of T. Okay, we need the following simple version of Sard's theorem, which we shall not prove. We assume it. In fact, this is an easy consequence of Taylor's expansion. Okay, So with that word, I will just state this easy form of Sard's theorem. Take f from J to R, which is C1 function. The set of critical values of f is of measure 0. This is a very simple statement. The proof is also very simple in this case. This theorem is very, very important in differential topology. It can be stated for any manifold to any manifold, in particular Rn to Rm and so on. Okay, the proofs are not that easy. Okay, so actually in this form, it is due to Morse. Okay, the Sard is the one who generalized it to the more general case. But I think they worked independently, so you can call it a Morse-Sard's theorem. Let gamma be a finite collection of smooth curves in R2. Okay, finite collection of smooth curves in R2. For any positive R, let AR denote a circle of radius R centered at 0, 0. Okay, then look at all R square belonging to 0 infinity, wherein AR is tangential to gamma. AR is a circle, okay, of radius R, right? So I am looking at this R square such that this AR is tangential to gamma. The gamma is a given collection of curves. This set of points is of measure 0. Measure 0 set are small. The complement is very large. What are they? They are of interest to us. Namely, if you choose a complementary point, then AR is not tangential to gamma. That is what will come. So that is our interest. So how does it prove this one? The proof of this one is very straightforward. Anyway, here is a picture. So this is one single curve I have drawn here, see, but it is part of a finite number of collections. What I am saying here, suppose I prove this statement for one single curve. Then let us call this collection A1. Oh, sorry, some S1. For another one, S2 and so on. They are all of measure 0. If I take the union of finite union of measure 0 sets, it's measure 0. And that will be the collection for all for this gamma. Because gamma is a finite union of these curves. Right? Therefore, this lemma will be proved if you prove it for that, assuming that gamma is a one single curve instead of several curves. Finitely many, of course. In fact, countably many also you can take. So here is a picture of this curve. Here is the ARs here, AR, AS, and so on. They are all centered at the same point. So the dotted figures are AR. Look at this AR. Okay, it looks like it is tangential here. Okay, such numbers are bad. They are very few. If you move it slightly out, look at this picture, it will be transversal. So points of intersections are nice here. So this is what we want to prove. Well, the Sard's theorem tells you that this is always true. In a very small movement, everywhere it will be there because what? A measure 0 set does not contain any open set, any open interval. In every open interval, there will be points belonging to the complement. Okay, so that is what I am using here. Okay, so let us first consider the case when gamma consists of single curve. Single curve means what? Given by a smooth function g from J to R. Smoothness is used. There is no regularity needed here. So let us write G as xt comma yt because it's taking values inside R2. Consider the function ft, which is x square t plus y square t. Okay, that's the way the circle is defined after all. So that is a function from J to R. Then the circle AR is tangential to this curve gamma at some point t inside J, which just means that this ft must be equal to R square and f prime t must be 0. What is f prime t? xt comma yt dot x dot comma y dot. So this is the derivative. Twice this one is a derivative. 0 is the same thing as f prime t is 0. Why? What is this one? This is nothing but the tangential line to x dot is y dot is tangential to the curve xtyt, right? This is a tangent. This dot, this one is 0 means this is perpendicular to this one. What is this one? This is the this is the point vector, right? The vector given by this point xtyt, and that is perpendicular to the circle, right? So if this dot, this one is 0, then it's a tangential because this will be now the tangential to the circle also. So the two tangents coincide. Okay, so that's all you have to see. So f dot t is 0 is the same thing as saying that ft is a critical point, critical value. And that's what we want to prove. Critical values are precisely of measure 0. So these R square is critical value, it's precisely measure 0. Where are these points? They are precisely the points wherein the two curves are tangential. Okay, once you have proved it for one curve, I have told you finite union of measure 0 sets is measure 0. Therefore, the conclusion follows for the general case. Okay. Now we come back to the graph G, curvilinear graph G on the surface S. So how to improve it? Okay. Remember, we started with surface patches. These sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma I, etc. They were surface patches. Sigma I of half the disks covers the entire surface, right? Union of sigma i's of half the disks. They were denoted by SI. Okay, the boundary of SI was CI. So look at one of the patches. Instead of looking in the surface, what is happening, which may be difficult, you just take the inverse image inside the disk in the plane. Okay, so take sigma, let me see what I have done here. Yeah, gamma 1 is sigma 1 inverse of this CI, where I is not equal to 1. Okay, look at all the other curves which are coming inside the one particular surface patch. Okay, so look at all those curves. How do you look at? By taking sigma inverse. Now this gamma 1 is a set of curves, finitely many set, namely I not equal to 1, I range from 1 to n, but not equal to 1. So I have so many curves here, okay, where they are all inside my disk D2, because sigma 1 is defined from D2 to S. Okay. By the above lemma, we can choose any number. I will choose them bigger than half. Okay. So what I'm going to do, first I took the half the circle with half the radius, and then they cover S. Now I'm going to expand this SI slightly bigger. If I expand the original thing slightly, they will still cover. That will not be a problem. But when I choose R slightly bigger, how do I choose this R? This R will be chosen so that this is not a critical value. That is possible by Sart's theorem. The moment it is critical value, the circle, corresponding circle, is not tangential to this gamma 1 at all. Okay. So this is the choice. So what I have done is, now I will replace C1 by this image of sigma 1 of AR. It is not A half now. Okay. It is not radius half, but slightly bigger. So sigma 1 will be redefined as equal to, C1 will be redefined as equal to, C1 is equal to sigma 1 of AR. Replace C1 by sigma 1 of AR. Okay. So one curve intersect all other curves nicely. Do the same thing for other curves now. Take sigma 2, do the same thing. Take sigma 3, do something. Okay, finitely many steps. What we have got after this finitely many steps is that every curve intersects every other curve transversely. Automatically, it will mean that the number of intersection points is finite. It may happen that several curves intersect in the same point. Never mind. But any two tangents, they will be independent. Any two of them. That is the best possible. Okay. So if they intersect several of them, and automatically there will not be overlaps, because if the overlaps is there, then the curves are there, then tangents will be the equal all over, right? So that will be a critical value. So we have chosen A has to be non-critical values. Okay. So once you have got this picture, all that you have to do is add some extra vertices to the curves, because if you take a circle, you can cut it into a triangle, only a triangle or a pentagon or whatever, by introducing number of vertices, at least 3 of them. 3 it will get triangle, 4 a quadrangle, and so on. Okay, so at least 3 you have to put on each circle. But whatever point of intersection is there, you include them. They will be vertices. If you need extra points, then only you put those things. After that, you can cut each of the domains also into triangles by adding extra vertices in the interior of these polygons. Okay, so that completes the proof of triangulation of any smooth surface, smooth compact surface. Okay, so now let's go to another important concept here. Before stating the Gauss-Bonnet theorem in the general case. Okay, so before stating the general case, we need this one. So start with a triangulation of a compact surface. Let V, E, F denote respectively the number of vertices, number of edges, and number of two cells formed by S. The two cells are all triangles now, because I have taken a triangulation. So defined by this G. Defined by this G means what? These triangles interior they are nothing but S minus G. Okay, so they are called faces also. The faces, that's why F. E corresponds to edges, V corresponds to vertices. The great Euler's formula, Euler's number is defined as alternate sum V minus E plus F. 0, 1, 2. So these are 0 edges. This like 0 faces. They are all faces. 0 faces, 1 faces, 2 faces, and so on. More generally, you can have some dot 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 here. Alternate sum is what is important here. Starting with V0, the vertices. This is the definition of Euler characteristic chi-S. Immediately I have written S, but it depends upon this G. It is I should write it chi-G actually, right? But I write it as chi-S because finally it does not depend upon what triangulation you take. This is a very, very deep theorem in algebraic topology, but we are not going to use this one. Okay, we will prove it for the smooth surfaces in R3 by Gauss-Bonnet theorem. Okay, so it's a consequence of Gauss-Bonnet theorem that this chi-G is actually equal to chi-S. If you take G, some other G prime, chi-G prime will be equal to chi-G. That is the meaning of this one. Okay, so I have stated it, but I don't have to prove it separately. It will be part of the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. So let me use this notation, though the notation, before using notation, I should have justified. Right now, if I write chi-G here, then you are happy. There is no problem, right? Okay. So the famous Euler's equation in this respect tells us that chi of S2 is always 2. This statement was proved by Euler himself. Okay. For S2, no matter what curve you take, what graph you take, chi of G is always equal to 2. This was the famous theorem of Euler. Okay. So that's irrespective of what triangulation you take. The definition above implicitly implies chi-S is independent of the triangulation. This is a deep topological result. We are going to show this, we are going to prove this indirectly for compact smooth surfaces via Gauss-Bonnet theorem. All right, let us go ahead. So this is the now statement of the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. Start with a smooth compact surface in R3. Then the surface integral of K is equal to 2 pi times chi-S, where K is the Gaussian curvature, chi-S is the Euler number of any triangulation of S. Okay, so once I state it like this, I can use chi-S. Now, any triangulation of S. So once you prove this formula, it will follow that for all the triangulation, the number is the same because the left-hand side hasn't changed. It doesn't depend upon what triangulation how you cut the surface. Okay, what triangulation you take, that has nothing to do with the kappa here. Okay, so once we prove this one, we are done. Now this is an easy consequence of Gauss-Bonnet theorem that we have proved local version, namely for surface patches. The beauty is the surface patches, formula is Gauss-Bonnet theorem is quite somewhat complicated, not quite complicated. It involves the curve there. A curvilinear curve, piecewise smooth curve is there. Okay, some delta as external angles are there. They have all vanished. So this becomes very nice, very simple here. So the general formula for the entire surface is very nice, very much simpler. Okay. So start with a triangulation. Let Ri denote the closed curvilinear triangles of S. Okay, triangles on S, I mean given by G. So the triangles are this one. union of all these closed triangles is equal to the whole of S. Each triangle, the boundary is a triangle, it's a curvilinear. They are curvilinear. What is the meaning of this? They are regular arcs. Okay. The entire thing is a circle divided into three portions. Each is like this. That is a picture of a triangulation. Okay. So SC is union of Ri, and Ri's do not overlap. Right? Each triangle stands on its own. Only two triangles will intersect along one single edge. In other words, every edge is also common to two different triangles, right? So that nothing else can happen inside a surface. It follows that the left-hand side of the Gauss-Bonnet formula, namely integral of k, is same thing as integral of k on each Ri, and then take the summation. Okay, because these are non-overlapping areas. So this area integral is the side x, it's a sum of this area integral of same function. Okay. Next, for each Ri, we know the formula. Okay. Why? Because each Ri is contained in a surface patch, and the boundary is just a triangle. So it's very simple. Let us write down the formula for each Ri. Okay. Let us denote the boundary of the triangle Ri by Ti. Let delta I equal to delta Ti. Denote the sum of the external angles of Ti. There are three of them. Then, from theorem that we have proved earlier, integral of kappa, integral of kdA over Ri is 2 pi minus this delta I minus integral of Ti, integral of kg, the Gaussian curvature of Ti. Okay. Ti is a triangle, is a curvilinear polygon, curve. Okay. On this curve, I have to integrate it. Okay. Upon taking the sum over all I, we get the left-hand side of the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. So you have to take the right-hand side and take the summation over all the I. Okay. So integral of S kappa kdA is, how many such triangles are there? There are F of them. This F is the number of triangles. So 2 pi will get multiplied by F. What happens to delta I? It is summation delta I. What happens to this? It is summation of all these integrals. Okay. So this is the formula. Now, what happens to this summation? This is like when you are doing Green's theorem, or in complex analysis when you are proving many other results along with, for example, the Cauchy-Bourassa theorem and so on. You start with a rectangle and then you cut it. Introducing extra edges, when you are taking the integral of the same function, the integral will occur twice along the same extra edge. That edge, once it will be occurring in the one direction, another time it will occur in the other direction. Therefore, the two integrals cancel out. So this is the thing that we have used in proving Green's theorem for multi-connected domains and so on, right? The same thing we are going to use here. What is happening? This summation, this Ti, consists of three edges. Each edge will occur inside some Ti and Tj exactly twice. And how does it occur? What is the orientation? So if one triangle is going this way, this triangle will be going the other way around, like this. Therefore, the two integrals cancel out. So each integral here, you can rewrite it as three different integrals, sum of three different integrals. Then 2 by 2, all the integrals cancel out. Okay, it's the same function being integrated twice, once in one direction, another in another direction along these edges of this triangle. Therefore, this summation is 0. So this has gone away. Understand? So I have to only worry about twice pi f minus summation delta I. Okay. So I have written it down here. Okay. So now what happens? Let us look at what happens to this delta I. So let us look at alpha ij, j equal to 1, 2, 3, denote the 3 internal angles of Ti. Ti is a triangle. Look at the internal angles of Ti. Then the external angles delta, sum of delta i's, will be equal to sum over j range from 1 to 3, only j 1, 2, 3. Each external angle is precisely equal to pi minus alpha ij. Okay, because alpha ij is an internal triangle, internal angle. So 3 of them, 3 pi minus summation alpha ij. Okay, what is alpha ij? Instead of external angle, I have got now internal angles. Okay, so I can rewrite summation delta I is equal to, each time there is a 3 pi, so 3 pi f minus sum of all the internal angles of all the triangles. So j range from 1 to 3, I range from 1 to n. Okay, so the second term here I have written like this. Okay, now we want to compute this sum of all the internal angles. Okay, in a different way. That is why this is called purely combinatorial. Okay, this proof is purely combinatorial. Okay, so this sum is equal to sum of all internal angles of all the triangles, right? But how do the internal angles occur? At one vertex, how many are there? Several of them are there. Many triangles are incident at that vertex. But if you look at all these, that will take care of all the internal angles incident at a single point. So now I have to look at all these, at all the points, that will take care of all the triangles. Right? Therefore, I can look it in the other way around. Namely, this summation alpha ij is nothing but at each vertex, you have to look at all the angles. But where are the angles measured? Remember, when you take the internal angles, external angles, etc., they are the angles subtended by the tangents. Okay, and they are measured in the plane which is tangential to the surface. So they are all plane figures. So the entire of all these angles will be measured in one single plane, namely the plane tangential to the surface at the point V, VI. VI is one of the vertex. Okay, so all these triangles, okay, they will cover the entire of the one single curve. So it will be 2 pi. So for each V, the contribution of summation alpha i's will be exactly 2 pi. How many vertices are there? V of them. V is the number of vertices, right? So there will be total will be 2 pi V. Okay. So we have got this is 0 and this summation is 2 pi V. Okay. So we have computed the whole thing. The kappa, the integral left hand side is equal to 2 pi f minus 2 pi V, right? sorry, 3 pi f minus 2 pi v. Okay, so this is 2 pi v, this is 2 pi v, but there is 3 pi f here. Okay, finally, you have to use one more information. Each triangle has 3 sides, but each side appears in exactly 2 triangles. Therefore, if you take twice E, because each edge occurs in 2 triangles, twice E must be equal to 3 times F. So this is the property of any triangulation. Okay, or in other words, E is equal to 3F by 2. Okay, so now you put E equal to 3F by 2. This is 3 pi F minus 2 pi V, and this is 2 pi F here. What you get is 2 pi common V minus E plus F. This is simple arithmetic, which will give you chi S. Okay, so that will complete the proof. Okay. So I think it is time already. So we shall stop here. We have come to a nice thing. So tomorrow I will do singularities of vector fields, an extremely interesting subject, which is borders on topology of fluid dynamics, you can say. Differential geometry, it is here. Differential topology also. This is a very, very interesting subject, but we are just touching it like an introduction to, like in the entire course is just touching on various ideas. Each of them can be developed into a full swing, and there is a lot of things to study anyway. Okay. Any questions?